Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where chivalry sounds glamorous, but the mud between your toes tells a different story. Imagine you're barely out of childhood, yet you're already tossed into the bruising life of a would-be knight. No comfy bed, no sweet lullabies, just cold straw and the smell of yesterday's stew clinging to the walls. You're small, but you're told to toughen up quick, because destiny apparently decided you should wear armor heavier than your dog. You probably won't survive this, but hey, let's pretend. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight. Drop your location and the local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 7 years old, maybe 8, and already someone has decided that chasing chickens, stumbling through puddles, and swinging sticks at other kids isn't just playtime, it's early combat training. Your tunic hangs off your shoulders, mud stains creeping higher than your knees, and you're told to learn discipline, which in kid speak really means fall down a lot and don't cry when the older boys laugh. The medieval playground is basically a medieval boot camp, only with more livestock wandering through. One fact that historians often note is that children of noble families were shipped off to other castles around this age, apprenticed as pages under different lords. The idea was to break ties with home comfort and mold you into a future warrior. Nice in theory, except in reality you mostly fetched bread and dodged broomsticks from annoyed cooks. It's less brave knight, more clumsy intern with a wooden sword. Still, your childhood training involves mock fight. There's a quirky tidbit you discover. Medieval children sometimes trained with hobby horses riding pretend steeds in elaborate games. So while you're covered in scrapes, you also have the privilege of galloping around the courtyard with a stick between your legs, neighing loudly, while the stable boys giggle. If chivalry is born here, it sure starts awkwardly. Your evenings aren't much better. After hours of roughhousing disguised as training, you're herded into dim halls that smell like wet wool and onions. Supper is bread hard enough to chip a tooth and thin broth that whispers, "Don't expect seconds." You collapse on straw bedding that pokes through your tunic, your muscles aching from the day's trials. Above you, the ceiling beams creak with the chill wind, and somewhere a rat scurries. Congratulations, young squire in training, you've just survived another day of becoming noble. Of course, historians still argue whether this harsh upbringing actually produced stronger warriors, or just children who learned to fake obedience. Maybe it was both. What's certain is that in this life, your body adapts faster than your heart, and your dreams of shiny armor are already coated in mud. As you drift into half-sleep, a master's voice cuts through your thoughts. Tomorrow you'll do better. Tomorrow you won't fall. But you know tomorrow will be the same. Another round of scraped knees, wooden swords snapping, and laughter at your expense. And in a twisted way, that steady rhythm of trial and failure is what sets the tone for the rest of your nightly path. Your childhood, then, isn't the golden cradle of honor you might expect. It's more like a muddy trench where resilience grows by accident, and as you close your tired eyes, straw rustling under your cheek, you realize that this is just the beginning of the long, exhausting road to knighthood. You wake the next morning to the chill slap of reality, because as a page you are no longer just a mud-covered child playing at war. You're now the errand runner for everyone more important than you. That includes knights, squires, ladies, priests, even the cook's cat, if it's feeling bossy. You shuffle across stone floors that never seem to lose their dampness, tunic still smelling faintly of yesterday's smoke. Before you even taste breakfast, someone shoves a pair of boots into your hands and says, "Polish them until they shine like the king's crown." Spoiler alert, they'll never shine because mud is a medieval constant. This stage of life, the page years, is where you're taught to be useful while quietly absorbing nightly culture. And by useful, I mean carrying trays of wine, chasing after dogs, memorizing polite bows, and learning to stand in a corner for hours without sighing too loudly. Historians agree that page duties were partly about manners, preparing you to move smoothly in courtly spaces. But between us, it feels more like unpaid labor with a side order of humiliation. Your mornings are a mix of polishing, sweeping, and running messages between rooms. Imagine being told to sprint across the Bailey in freezing rain, only to deliver a note that says something like, "My lord prefers pears to apples today." Yes, your big, heroic training includes becoming the medieval version of a food delivery service. And the worst part? You don't even get a tip. But there are odd perks. You learn to play instruments, to read the odd scrap of Latin, and to entertain your lords with clumsy juggling. One quirky fact: some pages were expected to master chess because supposedly a good knight should be as skilled at strategy over a board as he was on the battlefield. Except when you lose, the older knight smirks and says clearly you'll die in battle too. Nice pep talk there. Exhaust mealtimes as a page are both a blessing and a curse. Sure, you finally eat more than the scraps from the kitchen, but you also serve at tables where nobles slurp loudly, grease dripping down their sleeves. You, meanwhile, stand patiently nearby, waiting for someone to flick a chicken bone at you and say, "Fetch me more ale, boy." If you're lucky, you gnaw on crusts afterward, dreaming of the day you'll sit instead of serve. The castle is your school, but its lessons are hardly gentle. You're expected to learn hunting, hawking, and riding, often in ways that feel like the universe is trying to break your neck early. When you're tossed onto a horse that's twice your size, you cling on desperately, eyes watering in the wind while your superiors laugh. The horse, by the way, definitely knows you're scared. It turns corners like it's auditioning for a comedy sketch. Still, buried in the grind, there are glimpses of dignity. You watch knights stride through the hall, armor gleaming in torchlight, and you think, one day, that could be me. You mimic their swagger in the mirror of a rain puddle, though right now you're more wet goose than gallant warrior. Historians still argue whether pages truly learned discipline and culture through these chores, or whether it was just an elaborate way to guarantee endless free labor for lords. Either way, you don't have a choice. Every polished boot, every poured goblet, and every bent-back bow is supposed to hardwire obedience into your bones. By evening, when your tasks finally dwindle, you sink onto your straw mattress, arms aching from carrying platters and your head ringing with new Latin words you'll probably forget by morning. The torches flicker along the stone corridors, casting shadows that stretch like giants. Somewhere, a bard strums a lute, singing about legendary knights who slayed dragons and rescued damsels. You, meanwhile, just slayed a wine jug that slipped from your grip, earning you an earful from the steward. Not exactly ballad material. Still, you can't help but drift into dreams with a spark of hope. Maybe after enough years of fetching boots and dodging insults, you'll climb the ladder, literally up onto a horse that doesn't hate you, and finally step into the life of a squire. You've survived childhood scrapes and page servitude, and now you finally graduate into the oh-so-glamorous life of a squire. At least that's how the knights frame it. Now you're training for glory. But the truth? It's basically more chores. Only this time, the objects you're scrubbing weigh about as much as a cow and smell even worse. You wake up to the clatter of iron, the whinny of restless horses, and the faint aroma of old sweat soaked into armor padding. Congratulations, you're officially a medieval knight's personal assistant, minus the dental plan. Your daily to-do list reads like a medieval workout program. You polish armor until your hands go numb, tugging at straps and buffing metal that will only get muddy again by lunch. You drag shields across the yard, practice carrying heavy lances and clean weapons that could easily lop off your head if you sneeze wrong. And that's before breakfast. The knights bark orders like drill sergeants. Tighten this, loosen that, fetch my horse, and for heaven's sake don't trip again. It's a miracle you're still standing after the first week. The mainstream fact here, every knight needed a squire not only for battlefield support but for daily survival. Knights were walking tanks, and tanks don't maintain themselves. That meant you were expected to be a valet, mechanic, medic, cheerleader, and furniture mover, all rolled into one exhausted teenager. Imagine trying to lug your knight's 60-pound shield up a hill while he reminds you that real men never complain. Thanks, sir. Could you maybe carry it yourself for once? Quirky tidbit. Some squires had to sleep right next to their knight's bed, acting as a sort of medieval alarm clock in case of a midnight raid. So if your knight snored like a war horn, too bad, you were stuck with it. And if he dreamed about battle and swung his arms in his sleep, well, good luck dodging her. Historians still argue whether squires were genuinely respected apprentices on the path to knighthood, or just glorified servants with the occasional perk of holding a sword. Evidence suggests both. Depending on your knight, you could either be treated like a son or like a mop with legs. Most likely, you were somewhere in between. Tolerated, occasionally praised, but mostly invisible until needed. The food situation doesn't improve much. Sure, you eat a little better than peasants, but don't expect feasts. More often, it's reheated stew with chunks of mystery meat floating like ominous buoys. Sometimes you wonder if the kitchen just dumped in whatever crawled too close to the fire pit. You joke with other squires that one day you'll open a tavern serving real food, bread without rocks in it maybe. But for now, you gnaw quietly, too tired to laugh. And the horses, oh, the horses. They're magnificent beasts, yes, but they also leave behind mountains of steaming reminders that you're the one responsible for mucking stalls. You spend hours shoveling, muttering under your breath while your knight shows off to visiting nobles. Occasionally, a horse sneezes in your face, coating you in hay-scented slime. Glamorous, isn't it? But amid the drudgery, you feel progress. Your arms strengthen from carrying gear, your reflexes sharpen from sparring, and every now and then your knight gives a nod of approval. That tiny gesture, almost invisible, fuels you through days of back-breaking labor. Because even though you're still fetching boots and scrubbing chainmail, you can taste the possibility of something greater. As night falls, you collapse onto straw, smelling faintly of iron and horse. Your back aches, your hands are blistered, but your mind races with dreams of the future. Maybe tomorrow you'll finally win a sparring match. Maybe your knight will say you're ready for more. Oh. Or maybe you'll just polish armor until your reflection looks back at you, exhausted but determined. Either way, you're learning the truth. Knighthood is less about glory, more about surviving the grind. You've endured the bruises of a squire, polished enough armor to blind a small village, and shoveled enough horse muck to fertilize half of France. Now the moment everyone has promised is finally at hand, your initiation into full knighthood. Spoiler, if you thought this meant parades, parties, and instant respect, brace yourself. The path begins not with cheering crowds, but with hunger, stiff knees, and the long echo of church bells in cold stone halls. The first thing they do is strip you of comfort. You're ordered to fast. No food, no drink, just the hollow growl of your stomach reminding you how weak you really are. While other nobles feast in candlelit halls, you kneel alone in a chapel, stomach churning, lips dry. A priest murmurs prayers, his voice mixing with the wind, sneaking through the cracks in the stained glass windows. Your body trembles, not from divine awe, but from low blood sugar. You half expect to pass out before God gets around to blessing you. This is the vigil, a ritual designed to prove your devotion. You're to spend the entire night awake, kneeling before the altar, clutching a sword as though it's the only thing keeping you alive. By dawn, your knees are stiff, your back aches, and your eyelids droop like lead. And yet tradition insists this is how a boy becomes a man. Historians still argue whether these vigils were always taken so seriously, or if many young squires secretly nodded off while pretending to pray. Either way, you're warned that dozing could invite the devil himself to snatch your honour. No pressure, right? Then comes the bath. Yes, a real bath, an event so rare it deserves its own choir. You're scrubbed and dressed in white, symbolising purity. Though the lice in your tunic didn't get the memo, then you're fitted into ceremonial robes of red and black, colours meant to remind you of both sacrifice and strength. Finally, one drapes a heavy sword belt around your waist, nearly tipping you over. Apparently, holiness comes with lower back pain. The quirky tidbit? Some ceremonies included the knight-to-be literally slapping the squire across the face with the flat of a sword. It was called the collet, a sharp smack meant to remind you never to flinch in battle. Nothing says spiritual awakening like being whacked in the jaw by your mentor while the congregation nods approvingly. The following morning, when the sun spills gold across the courtyard, the big moment arrives. Trumpets blare, villagers gather, and your lord steps forward. He taps your shoulder with his blade, declaring you a knight. Cheers rise, banners flutter, and for a fleeting moment you feel like the star of a medieval blockbuster. You're grinning, chest puffed out, basking in admiration. This is it, the glory you dreamed about while scrubbing boots and hauling shields. Except the reality settles in fast. Within hours, you're back in the mud, armour strapped on, horse saddled, and orders shouted in your ear. You thought knighthood was the reward. Turns out it's just the beginning of heavier armour, harder battles, and higher expectations. Everyone expects you to embody honour, loyalty, and bravery, but no one mentions the blisters on your feet or the fact that armour is basically a medieval sauna suit. And then there's the vow of service. You're now sworn to obey your lord in all things. If he decides tomorrow that his neighbour's sheep look especially fluffy, congratulations, you'll be marching off to war over livestock. The honour is real, yes, but so is the exhaustion. By nightfall, the cheers have faded and you're back in your quarters staring at the sword laid across your lap. Its blade gleams in the torchlight, a reminder of the weight now on your shoulders. You whisper to yourself that you'll live up to the vows, even as your body aches from the rituals. And deep down, you can't help but wonder, was this initiation a sacred rebirth, or just the start of a lifetime of bone-crunching chores dressed up as glory? You wake up the morning after your knighting and suddenly that shining suit of armour, the very symbol of your new rank, feels less like a badge of honour and more like a personal prison. The attendants drag in the pieces, one by one, clanging like cooking pots, and set them before you. There's the breastplate, the greaves, the gauntlets, the helmet, all polished to a blinding sheen, all heavier than your hopes. You stare at it with a mix of awe and dread, because today you finally wear it all. And the moment it's strapped on, you realise you've made a terrible life choice. The first problem, weight. Historians estimate that a full suit of plate armour could weigh between 45 and 60 pounds. That doesn't sound too bad when you imagine lifting a suitcase, until you remember this suitcase is strapped to every part of your body while you try to fight, ride, or simply walk without tipping over. As soon as the last strap is buckled, you wobble like a toddler in winter clothes. Your knees scream, your shoulders ache. You take 2 steps and nearly topple sideways like a turtle trying to roll off its back. And it's not just the weight. It's the heat. Under the metal, you're wearing padded gambeson, thick quilted cloth meant to cushion blows. Add a heavy helmet with only a narrow slit to breathe through, and suddenly you're basically a medieval baked potato. Sweat pours down your face, dripping into your eyes, stinging like betrayal. By mid-morning, you feel like you've done hot yoga in a steel coffin. Quirky fact, there are recorded instances of knights needing cranes or winches to mount their horses while in full armour. Imagine the embarrassment. Villagers gathered, drums beating, and there you are, dangling helplessly as men hoist you onto your warhorse like luggage being loaded into a cart. You smile bravely, pretending it's dignified, but deep down you know you look like a rowus, a ham being delivered to the feast. Still, you train, you shuffle through drills, learning how to swing a sword without tipping over. Every movement feels exaggerated. Lift, swing, stumble, catch yourself. Your sword clangs off a practice dummy's shield, vibrating through your whole body. You mutter under your breath about how knights are supposed to be elegant, noble warriors. Right now, you're basically a clumsy clank machine. And the armor doesn't just weigh you down physically, it complicates everything. Eating? Good luck. Your gauntlets make gripping bread like wrestling with a live fish. Scratching an itch on your nose? Forget it. You're stuck in an endless loop of frustration until someone takes pity and removes your helmet. Even bathroom breaks become a logistical nightmare. You'll never look at a chamber pot the same way again. Historians still argue whether knights actually fought long battles in full armor or mostly wore lighter gear for mobility. Some suggest the plate was more for show in tournaments or ceremonial marches, while chainmail and partial armor did the heavy lifting in day-to-day warfare. Either way, you don't have the luxury of debate. You've been strapped into this iron oven, and you're expected to march, fight, and look heroic doing it. And yet, as miserable as it is, the armor also carries a strange pride. Villagers gape when you pass, children whisper in awe, and even other soldiers eye your gleaming plate with respect. You may feel like a boiling turtle inside, but outside, you look like the very image of power. That's the trap of knighthood. You suffer invisibly while projecting glory. By evening, when the straps are finally loosened and the armor slides off, you collapse into a sweaty heap on the floor. Your tunic clings, your skin burns with chafing, and your arms tingle from hours of strain. You gulp water like it's the finest wine and swear you'll never move again. But deep down, you know tomorrow you'll be shoved back into that steel shell. Because honor, apparently, is measured in how long you can survive being roasted alive without complaining too loudly. You thought the armor was heavy? Wait until you meet the beast beneath you, the warhorse. They call it a destrier, a powerful animal trained for battle, a creature worth more than most villages combined. From a distance, it's majestic, muscles rippling, mane flowing, hooves pounding the earth like thunder. Up close, though, it's terrifying. Its eyes roll, its nostrils flare, and it snorts as if to say, "Good luck staying on me, tin can." Mounting this creature is its own challenge. You step into the stirrup, heave your armoured body upward, and for a horrifying second you're dangling half on, half off, flailing like a sack of turnips. The stable boys snicker and the horse flicks its tail in smug amusement. Eventually you settle into the saddle, only to discover that the destrier has no intention of making life easy. It lurches forward suddenly, and you nearly bite your tongue in half. Mainstream fact, war horses were not only expensive, but specially bred and trained. A knight's mount was considered his most valuable possession, often costing as much as a small estate. Training them took years. They had to endure clashing swords, screaming soldiers, and the chaos of battle without bolting. That sounds noble, but from your seat, it mostly means you're sitting on an animal that's basically a medieval tank with a mind of its own. And don't think the warhorse is just a noble companion. These animals had personalities, big, stubborn ones. Your destrier knows you're new. It senses your hesitation and takes full advantage. One moment you're trying to trot gracefully past the castle gates, the next you're yanked sideways as the beast decides the patch of grass near the moat looks tastier than your training schedule. You tug the reins, you beg, you curse under your breath, but the horse doesn't care. You're along for the ride, pal. Quirky tidbit: some horses were trained to kick and bite in combat, turning them into four-legged weapons. Imagine charging into battle, only to have your horse decide mid-swing to snap at the enemy like an angry dog. Historians still argue whether knights truly relied on this tactic or whether chroniclers exaggerated for dramatic flair. Either way, you keep your distance from your destrier's teeth, you've already lost enough pride falling off its back. Training sessions feel endless. You practice riding with lance in hand, shield strapped tight, learning to balance while your mount surges beneath you. Your thighs burn, your arms ache, and your ears ring from the night barking. Sit tall, don't grip with your knees. Easier said than done when your knees are currently screaming mutiny. Every misstep earns you a jolt that rattles your teeth. More than once you slide right off into the dirt while your horse trots away, looking very pleased with itself. At night, you stumble back to the stables, part of your job being to groom the very beast that just tried to kill you with sudden stops. You curry its coat, clean its hooves, and whisper complaints into its twitching ears. The horse flicks its tail, smacks you in the face, and then demands more oats. Knights may be noble, but their horses, absolute divas. Still, there's an undeniable bond forming. As much as the destrier tortures you, it's also your partner, your lifeline in the chaos of battle. When you finally manage to ride smoothly across the training yard, lance steady, armor gleaming, you feel a flicker of pride. For a moment, you imagine yourself charging across a field, banners flying, enemies scattering. Then the horse stumbles. You nearly faceplant, and the illusion shatters like a dropped goblet. Historians debate whether knights loved their horses or simply saw them as tools of war. You suspect it was a messy blend of both. Tonight, as you collapse into straw, your legs trembling and your face still red from the horse's tail whip, you know one thing for sure. Surviving knighthood isn't just about carrying armor, it's about keeping your seat on the beast that carries you. Your bond with the warhorse is shaky at best, but now comes a fresh misery: live combat training, wooden lances, dulled swords, and blunted axes, tools supposedly designed to keep you safe. Spoiler, they don't. You shuffle into the yard, armor clanking, sweat already trickling down your back, and line up across from another squire who looks just as nervous as you. The knight overseeing practice bellows, "Remember, this is only training." Then he smirks because he knows what's coming next. The whistle blows, and your opponent charges, wooden lance tucked under his arm. You lift your shield just in time to hear the crack as the lance slams into your ribs. Air rushes out of your lungs like you've been punched by an angry blacksmith. You stagger, wobble, and collapse into the dust while everyone laughs. Welcome to the glamorous world of knightly practice, basically a medieval comedy show starring your bruised torso. Mainstream fact: squires and young knights trained constantly with wooden or blunt weapons, sometimes on horseback, sometimes on foot. It was considered the only way to build the stamina and skill needed for battle. But blunt doesn't mean painless. A strike could still break bones, shatter teeth, or leave you coughing blood. Training dummies and quintains helped, but nothing compared to another eager squire swinging for your head like he's chopping wood. Between bouts, you drag yourself to your feet, ribs aching. The knight shouts, "Again!" and you're shoved back into the ring. This time, your wooden sword smacks against your opponent's helmet with a clong so loud you both pause blinking stars. Then the knight yells, "Don't stop!" and the fight resumes in a flurry of clumsy swings. By the end, you're both gasping, armor dented, sweat stinging your eyes. Quirky tidbit: training accidents were so common that some castles kept extra squires around, almost like spare parts, because one or two were bound to be sidelined by injuries. Broken arms, concussions, and even deaths weren't unheard of. Historians still argue whether this was negligence or just the accepted cost of preparing for war. From where you're lying in the mud, wheezing like a punctured bellows, it definitely feels like negligence. Your afternoons are spent practicing lance thrusts against a rotating target called a quintain, a wooden post with a shield on one end and a weight on the other. Hit it wrong and the weight swings around to smack you in the back of the head. You learn quickly, though not without a few spectacular failures that leave you seeing double. The stable boys watch from the sidelines, placing bets on which squire will topple first. Spoiler, it's usually you. And then there's joust practice. You mount your destrier, grip the lance, and lower your visor. The world shrinks to a narrow slit of vision, the sound of hooves pounding in your ears. You charge toward another squire, heart hammering. The impact rattles your bones, the lance splinters, and you're catapulted from the saddle, landing flat on your back. The sky spins overhead while your opponent whoops in victory. The knight overseeing practice sighs, muttering something about how you'd better toughen up before you embarrass him in front of real enemies. Evenings are no kinder. You limp back to the hall, armor clattering, bruises blossoming purple across your arms and legs. You peel off the padding beneath your armor, the fabric soaked in sweat, and wince at the fresh constellation of aches decorating your body. Over supper, the knights laugh about their own training injuries, boasting about scars like they're badges of honor. You poke at your bread crust and wonder if you'll ever stop feeling like a walking bruise. Historians still debate whether training truly prepared squires for the chaos of real battle, or if the brutality was more about testing endurance. Perhaps both, but as you collapse onto your straw bed, ribs still tender, you know one thing: every thud, crack, and fall is carving the reality of knighthood into your bones, and tomorrow you'll wake up to do it all again. After weeks of bruises, splinters, and horse-related humiliation, you finally get assigned one of the honourable knightly duties: standing guard. At first, the idea flatters you. You imagine yourself on the castle walls, stoic and noble, sword gleaming in the moonlight, villagers gazing up in awe. Reality is not that. Reality is hours of boredom, aching legs, and a chilly wind that sneaks through every gap in your armor until your teeth chatter like castanets. You take your post along the battlements, torchlight flickering against the damp stone. From this lofty perch, you expect drama, raiders, rival armies, spies creeping through the shadows. Instead, you spend most of the night watching sheep graze lazily at the base of the hill. A particularly bold one bleats directly at you, and for a second you feel like it's mocking your existence. Some knight you are, its eyes seem to say, before it wanders back to chewing grass. Mainstream fact: knights were not only warriors, they also served as guards and enforcers of their lord's will. This meant endless patrols of castles, villages, and roads, especially during times of uneasy peace. While romantic tales make it sound heroic, the truth was usually monotonous. You're basically a medieval night shift security guard, only without coffee to keep you awake. The hours stretch. You pace back and forth, boots scuffing against stone, trying to stay warm. Every sound feels amplified: the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl, the distant splash of water in the moat. Your imagination kicks in. Maybe that shadow is a thief. Maybe that twig snap is an assassin. But no, it's just a wandering cat glaring at you before disappearing into the dark. You sigh, leaning on your spear, and wish you were anywhere else. Quirky tidbit: some castles reportedly gave guards spiked stools to sit on during watch, the idea being that if you started to nod off, the pain from slipping against the spikes would jolt you awake. Whether that's a deterrent or just medieval sadism, historians still argue. All you know is you don't dare close your eyes for fear the steward will catch you and have you mucking stables for a week as punishment. The monotony gnaws at you. You start humming tuneless songs, tapping your fingers against your shield, anything to fight the creeping drowsiness. You joke to yourself that one day bards will write songs about your heroic defense against an invading flock of geese, Sodozi, defender of the coop. Not exactly the legend you had in mind, but at least it passes the time. Hours later, a knight finally comes to relieve you. He claps you on the shoulder, mutters, "All quiet," and strolls off whistling. You, meanwhile, shuffle back inside, your bones stiff from the cold, your eyelids heavy from lack of sleep. You collapse onto your straw pallet, silently praying tomorrow's duty involves anything other than staring at sheep under a damp sky. Historians still debate whether such long, uneventful guard shifts were effective or if they simply dulled a knight's senses when real danger finally did appear. From your perspective, it feels like a test of endurance, not skill. Because tonight wasn't about fighting enemies, it was about battling boredom, fatigue, and the creeping doubt that maybe this whole knighthood thing isn't nearly as glamorous as promised. The trumpet of duty has finally quieted, and tonight you're not on guard duty or trudging through mud. You're invited to a feast in the great hall. At last, the kind of nightly reward you've daydreamed about. Long wooden tables, torches blazing, the scent of roasted meat filling the air. You picture golden goblets, laughter, maybe even a bard singing about your imaginary heroics. But the truth? Medieval feasts are less glamour, more chaos, uncomfortable, greasy, and louder than a tavern brawl. The benches creak as everyone squeezes shoulder to shoulder. Plates, forget them. Most of the food is piled on shared platters, so you tear hunks off with your hands, trying not to notice how many unwashed fingers have pawed at the same loaf of bread. You gnaw on a chunk of beef so tough you wonder if it was cooked by accident. Grease drips down your chin and soaks your sleeves because napkins in this noble world are basically your clothes. Mainstream fact: medieval feasts often showcased wealth, but hygiene and manners were a different story. Guests used trenchers, stale hunks of bread, as makeshift plates, tossing them to the dogs when they grew soggy. Knives were personal tools, forks hadn't yet caught on, and drinking from shared cups was common. In other words, the hall looked rich, but the dining style? Messy at best, downright gross at worst. You shift uncomfortably as the knight beside you elbows for more space. He laughs with a mouthful of mutton spraying crumbs across the table. The minstrels strike up a tune, but it's off-key and no one seems to mind. Laughter booms, goblets clank, and somewhere a drunken noble starts singing about his lost horse, very loudly, very badly. Quirky tidbit: feasts weren't just about eating. They often included bizarre entertainments like trained bears, jesters telling lewd jokes, or even entire roasted peacocks served with feathers reattached for flair. Historians still argue whether these spectacles were truly enjoyed or merely tolerated. From where you sit, trying to chew through sinewy venison while a juggler drops knives dangerously close to your plate, it feels more like tolerated. And then there's the smell. Hundreds of bodies crammed into a hall with roaring fires. It's a stew of sweat, smoke, ale, and roasting meat. You take a gulp of watered wine, hoping to wash it down, but it tastes faintly of vinegar. The nobles don't seem to care. They're too busy shouting toasts, boasting about hunts, and challenging each other to drinking contests you know will end with someone snoring face first in the gravy. By the time dessert arrives, a few sad apples, maybe some honey cakes, you're more exhausted than satisfied. Your stomach aches from greasy food, your ears ring from the din, and your tunic now smells permanently of smoke and meat fat. You shuffle out of the hall, blinking into the cooler night air, feeling like the feast drained more energy than it gave. Historians still debate whether knights truly relished these events as moments of camaraderie or secretly dreaded the overindulgence. You suspect it was both. A chance to bond, yes, but also a reminder that noble living wasn't always noble. Tonight, as you collapse onto your straw bed, still picking grease from under your fingernails, you wonder if the bard's songs about banquets ever mentioned how much indigestion came with the honor. The feast left you stuffed, smoky, and slightly queasy, but there's no time to wallow. Now you're expected to embrace the most baffling part of knightly life: courtly love. You'd think battles and bruises were difficult, but nothing compares to the absurdity of standing in sweaty armor while reciting poems about eternal devotion to a lady who may or may not even notice you exist. It starts innocently enough. You're told to compose verses, short and sweet, comparing her eyes to stars or her hair to golden silk. Problem is, you've spent most of your life shoveling horse dung and training with swords, not studying poetry. So your first attempt sounds like, "My lady, your smile shines brighter than freshly polished armor." The other knights snicker, and you sink deeper into your chair, cheeks burning hotter than the fireplace. Mainstream fact: the tradition of courtly love flourished in medieval courts, with knights dedicating songs, poems, and heroic deeds to noble women. It wasn't always about romance. Sometimes it was symbolic, a way of showing loyalty or status, but the rituals often bordered on ridiculous, especially when knights paraded around in stifling gear just to impress someone with a glance. So here you are, shuffling through the hall, armor clanking, bowing stiffly before your chosen lady. You kneel, hold her hand, and recite your shaky poem. She nods politely, then promptly turns back to her conversation about falcon breeding. You can't help but think, was that worth 3 hours of rhyming words with honor? Quirky tidbit: knights sometimes wore their ladies' favor into tournaments, tokens like ribbons, veils, or even sleeves tied to their helmets. Imagine jousting with half your vision blocked by a piece of lace that smells faintly of lavender. Romantic, yes. Practical, absolutely not. Historians still argue whether these tokens were genuine displays of affection or just fashionable props. Either way, you find yourself secretly hoping for one, even if it means being mocked by your fellow squires. Evenings in court are filled with this ritualized dance. You sit by the fire, strumming a lute you barely know how to play, hoping she notices. Your fingers fumble, the melody screeches, and your comrades chuckle into their cups. One knight leans over and whispers, "Don't worry, lad. Real love is just making sure she doesn't see you fall off your horse." Comforting, in a backhanded sort of way. But courtly love isn't only awkward, it's exhausting. You're expected to prove devotion not just through words, but deeds. That means volunteering for dangerous missions, offering your winnings in tournaments, and, when asked, writing more dreadful poetry. You sigh, penning another line about her radiant grace, even though your fingers still ache from sparring and you'd rather be sleeping. Historians still debate whether these traditions were ever taken seriously or if most knights rolled their eyes behind closed doors. To you, the whole charade feels like a second job, less about love, more about keeping up appearances in a world obsessed with chivalry's theatrics. By the end of the night, when the hall quiets and the fire dies low, you retreat to your straw pallet. Your armor is piled in a heap, your stomach still turning from greasy meat, and your head buzzing with rhymes that don't quite work. You close your eyes and whisper one last line to yourself. "My lady, your beauty is less terrible than this armor rash." Not exactly ballad-worthy, but honest enough. After fumbling through poetry and feasts, you might think life as a knight evens out. But tonight you're far from stone halls or roaring fireplaces. You're camped in the open, bedding down on cold, uneven ground, wrapped in a cloak that smells faintly of horse. The stars above are breathtaking, but the mud beneath you is not. And while the songs of crickets could lull you into peace, the chorus of fleas, mosquitoes, and grumbling squires makes sure you get no rest. The fire burns low, spitting sparks, and your dinner is a pot of stew simmering in the smoke. It looks edible if you squint, but the taste, boiled disappointment. The meat is unidentifiable, the vegetables mush, and you chew as though gnawing on soggy rope. You mutter, "Fit for a king," and your comrades laugh, not because it's funny, but because if they don't laugh, they'll cry. Mainstream fact, nightly campaigns often meant months in temporary camps, living in conditions far rougher than the castles they defended. Food was basic: stews, dried bread, salted fish, and fresh water wasn't always guaranteed. Armies carried barrels of ale because it was safer to drink than most rivers. But warm, flat ale hardly feels luxurious. The bugs are relentless. Fleas creep from your bedding, lice tickle at your scalp, and mosquitoes feast as if you're the banquet. You slap at your arm, miss, and end up bruising yourself on the armor padding. Around you, the camp hums with quiet misery, men scratching, horses snorting, a dog whining near the fire. Someone snores so loudly you're convinced he's scaring off the owls. Quirky tidbit. Medieval soldiers sometimes believed garlic, onions, or even horse dung could ward off disease and pests. You rub a clove of garlic on your wrists, and while it doesn't seem to help the itching, at least your neighbours inch away, giving you more elbow room. Historians still argue whether such practices were superstition or desperate improvisation. Either way, you stink like a walking stew pot. The worst part isn't the food or the bugs, it's the endless damp. Rain turns everything to muck, your cloak never dries, and your boots squelch with each step. You try to sleep, but the ground jabs your ribs, and every time you shift, a rock finds a new way to dig into your spine. You envy the peasants back home in their thatched huts. They may live humbly, but at least they're dry. You roll onto your side, staring at the flicker of the campfire. Shadows dance across helmets propped on logs, shields leaning like tired sentries. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and horses. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. You pull your cloak tighter, heart quickening, then remind yourself you're the knight. You're supposed to be the scary one. Still, you hope the horses don't bolt before dawn. Historians debate whether knights glorified these campaigns in retrospect, turning miserable nights into tales of valor. You suspect the truth is more mundane. No one sings songs about the knight who scratched fleas all night and woke up smelling like smoke. But here you are, enduring exactly that, one itchy, sleepless evening at a time. When morning finally comes, the camp stirs with groans and curses. You rise stiff, eyes gritty, cloak damp. Another day begins, and you know tonight will be the same. Muddy ground, smoky stew, and the buzzing of insects as your lullaby. The songs of nights never mention this part, but you're living it. The slow grind of discomfort that makes glory taste like ashes. The muddy camps and sleepless nights were only the prelude. Now your Lord declares it's time to march, not just across the countryside, but across continents. The banners rise, the horns blare, and suddenly you're swept into the grand spectacle of a crusade. It sounds glorious when sung by priests in the cathedral. God wills it, God wills it. But when you're trudging under a merciless sun, with armor chafing your shoulders and your stomach gnawing itself hollow, the glamour fades quickly. The first shock is the heat. You've spent years training in the damp chill of northern castles, but now the sun beats down like a blacksmith's hammer. Your helmet turns into an oven, sweat dripping into your eyes, stinging until you can barely see. Every mile feels longer than the last. Men collapse on the roadside, armor clattering, tongues thick with thirst. You clutch your water skin like treasure, only to find it tastes like warm leather by the time you raise it to your lips. Mainstream fact, crusading armies often suffered more from hunger, thirst, and disease than from enemy swords. Supplies were scarce, caravans unreliable, and local villages not exactly thrilled to welcome thousands of foreign knights trampling their fields. Chroniclers describe whole columns of soldiers dying before they ever reached a battlefield. You, right now, are starting to believe those stories weren't exaggerated. The march becomes a blur of dust and despair. Horses falter, hooves cracking on rocky ground. You pass men digging shallow graves for comrades who collapsed an hour earlier. The air reeks of sweat, rot, and hopelessness. At night, you huddle in makeshift camps, gnawing on dried bread so tough it could double as a weapon. You whisper jokes with fellow squires. At least the bread will outlive us. But laughter fades quickly under the weight of fatigue. Quirky tidbit. Some nights carried reed, licks, charms, or even jars of holy water as divine protection. One of your comrades insists rubbing a splinter of wood from the true cross on his blisters will heal them. Historians still argue whether crusaders were driven more by faith, politics, or sheer greed, but here on the ground it feels like survival is the only true motivator. The battles, when they come, are brutal. You charge under the blinding sun, lungs burning, sword swinging. Arrows whistle past, shields splinter, the clash of steel deafens you. You shout yourself hoarse, heart thundering, barely aware of where your knight even is amid the chaos. The dust chokes, the heat crushes, and victory tastes like sand and blood. When the fighting stops, you stumble back to camp, trembling, wondering how you're still alive. But the misery doesn't end with combat. Disease stalks the ranks, dysentery, fevers, infections that spread faster than wildfire. You watch men crawl into the shade, never to rise again. The priests insist on prayer, but prayer doesn't cure lice or rotting wounds. You rub garlic on your skin, muttering old folk charms, hoping superstition might succeed where medicine fails. And through it all, doubt gnaws at you. Was this truly about holy duty, or about lords carving out new lands and fortunes? Historians still argue whether faith or greed drove the Crusades. As you march another endless mile, lips cracked, armor dragging you down, the question feels less academic. You whisper under your breath, "If God willed this, I wish He'd willed a shorter road." At night, lying on the hard ground, stars stretching endlessly overhead, you think about the comforts of the castle, the smoky hall, the greasy feasts, even the bleating sheep on guard duty. Compared to this, they feel like luxuries. Here, every breath is survival, every step a test. And you realize that the crusade isn't just a holy war. It's the ultimate reminder that knighthood is less about shining glory, more about enduring endless suffering with a sword in your hand. If crusades taught you the agony of endless marches, tournaments now teach you a different flavor of misery, one dressed up as sport. Picture this, a cheering crowd, banners snapping in the wind, lords and ladies gathered to admire the finest knights in the land. You trot onto the field, armored and proud, lance in hand. For a moment it almost feels like the stories, glory, honor, romance. Then the horn sounds, you lower your lance, and reality smashes into you, literally. Your destrier thunders forward, hooves pounding like drums. Across the tilt, another knight barrels toward you, lance leveled. The gap closes in seconds. You brace, heart hammering, crack! His lance explodes against your shield, shards flying like angry splinters. The force jolts through your body, rattling teeth, slamming you backward in the saddle. You just barely cling on. The crowd roars, but not because of your skill. They're thrilled you didn't fall flat on your backside. Mainstream fact: medieval tournaments were dangerous, far more than modern reenactments suggest. Lances could pierce visors, crush bones, even kill. Famous knights died in these games, but nobles loved them, both for the spectacle and as a training ground for war. To you, though, it feels like being paid in bruises for the entertainment of others. You circle back, another round begins. This time your lance shatters against your opponent's armor, the jolt nearly dislocating your shoulder. You drop the stub and fumble for your sword. The melee begins. dozens of knights bashing one another in a chaotic brawl. Dust rises, horses neigh, metal crashes. You swing wildly, catch a blow on your helmet, and stars burst in your vision. For a terrifying moment, you're certain your skull has cracked. But no, just another dent in the armor and another headache to nurse. Quirky tidbit. Some knights entered tournaments not just for honor, but for profit. If you unhorsed an opponent or captured him in the melee, you could demand ransom, or at least keep his gear. It was part sport, part business venture. Historians still argue whether tournaments were more about practice for war or a form of high-stakes gambling. Either way, when you fall flat in the dust, your only winnings are bruises and a broken lance. The crowd loves it. They cheer the clashes, gasp at the falls, and laugh at the unlucky knights dragged away by squires. Somewhere in the stands, a noble lady waves her kerchief, though you can't tell if it's for you or the knight who just nearly knocked you unconscious. Probably not you. By evening, the tournament field looks like a battlefield. Splintered lances, dented shields, groaning knights sprawled in the mud. You drag yourself off the field, aching from head to toe. Your squire fusses over the cracks in your armor, muttering about how much repairs will cost. You mutter back that the audience should pay you for risking your life while they sipped wine and cheered. Historians debate whether knights loved or dreaded tournaments. Some thrived on the fame, others resented the danger. Tonight, as you slump onto your straw bed, bruises blooming across your chest, you lean toward dread. Honor is nice, sure, but it doesn't soothe a pounding headache. And as you drift into uneasy sleep, you wonder how many more games like this you'll have to endure before glory finally feels worth the pain. The tournament left you battered, but now you face an enemy no sword can slay: filth. Disease lurks in every corner of your world, and it doesn't need a battlefield to strike. You wake scratching at your scalp, only to discover lice crawling like tiny conquerors across your hairline. Your gambeson smells permanently of sweat and horse, and the straw in your bedding crunches with fleas. Welcome to the glamorous life of a knight. Itchy, smelly, and perpetually one rash away from madness. Baths, rare luxuries. Maybe once a month if you're lucky, more often if you're unusually fastidious or your lord insists. Otherwise, you splash cold water on your face and call it good. Your armor, padded with layers of quilted cloth, traps sweat until it feels like you're marinating in your own juices. By the time you peel it off, you stink so badly that even the horses sidestep you. Mainstream fact: medieval Europe was rife with disease, from recurring plagues to outbreaks of dysentery and smallpox. Knights weren't spared by their status. If anything, cramped castles and filthy camps made them especially vulnerable. Sanitation was poor, and medicine relied heavily on superstition or guesswork. In the camp, rumors swirl of plague creeping through nearby villages. Whispers of black boils, fevers, and entire families vanishing into shallow graves. You shiver, though the night is warm. You've seen comrades carried off by lesser illnesses, bloody coughs, infected wounds, fevers that left men babbling nonsense. A knight may survive a lance through the ribs, only to be undone by a scratch that turns foul. Quirky tidbit: some believed garlic necklaces, amulets, or even carrying dried toads in pouches could ward off sickness. One of your comrades swears by a paste of crushed emeralds spread on wounds, though you're not sure if it heals or just makes him smell like jewelry. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine did more harm than good. Judging by your companion's green rash, you'd say more harm. And then there's the stench. The latrines overflow, chamber pots get dumped into the moat, and the streets reek of refuse. You gag walking through the courtyard, yet you're expected to breathe it all in like the price of civilization. Sometimes you joke that knights are the bravest men alive, not because they face swords and arrows, but because they survive the smell of their own castles. At night, You lie awake scratching, imagining every tickle on your skin is a flea. You press your cloak over your nose to dull the stench, only to realize the cloak smells worse. Your dreams are haunted not by dragons or battles, but by endless crawling bugs. You wake, slap at your arm, and find a red welt rising like a victory banner. Another day, another parasite. Historians debate whether medieval people were nose-blind to these conditions, so accustomed to filth they hardly noticed. You're not so sure. From the way knights grumble, scratch and whisper charms against sickness, you suspect everyone noticed. They just didn't have the means to fix it. Tonight, as you douse a scratch with stale wine, you mutter that you'd rather face 10 angry knights than one flea with ambition. After weeks of scratching, sweating, and surviving stew that tasted suspiciously like boiled leather, you cling to one rare comfort, the camaraderie of fellow knights. Brotherhood, they call it, a noble bond forged in fire, steel, and, more often than not, shared misery. Tonight you sit around a smoky fire with your comrades, armour piled nearby, mugs of weak ale in hand. For a few fleeting hours you forget the lice, the mud, the bruises. Stories fly thick as arrows. One knight brags of unhorsing 3 opponents in a single tournament. Another swears he once fought off 10 bandits with nothing but a dagger and God's grace. You laugh, knowing full well he probably tripped over his own sword, but you let him have his glory. Your own tale involves slipping in horse muck mid-charge. Hardly heroic, but at least it gets a roar of laughter. In these moments, honour isn't measured in victories, but in how well you can make your comrades choke on their ale. Mainstream fact, the idea of knightly brotherhood was central to chivalric culture. Knights pledged loyalty to their lords, but bonds with fellow fighters often ran deeper, forged through shared hardship on campaign. Chronicles speak of knights holding the line together, rescuing one another and avenging fallen brothers. But the truth, it wasn't always so noble, because beneath the laughter, rivalries simmer. You notice one knight eyeing your boots. They're sturdier than his, and he jokes about borrowing them someday. Another laughs at your story, but steals a piece of bread from your bowl when you aren't looking. Quirky tidbit. Knights were notorious for squabbling over spoils, horses, or even rations. Brotherhood often lasted right up until someone's horse feed mysteriously vanished. You swear by the torchlight that the same comrade who toasted your bravery yesterday just borrowed your best saddle blanket. Still, when danger looms, grudges fade. In battle, you've seen men risk their lives for comrades, dragging them from the field despite arrows falling like rain. Around the fire, you exchange promises. If I fall, see my horse is cared for. If you fall, I'll return your sword to your kin. Historians still argue whether such oaths were born of true affection or obligation to knightly code. You suspect it was both, affection wrapped in the armour of duty. The night deepens, the fire dwindles. One knight sings off-key, another snores already, head tipped back like a broken doll. You stare into the embers, feeling both comforted and wary. This is your family now, men who will laugh at your failures, swipe your rations, and maybe, just maybe, die beside you. You smile despite yourself. It's an odd kind of brotherhood, rough, flawed, often irritating, but real. As you stretch out on your cloak, smoke clinging to your hair, you think of how songs praise knights as noble, solitary heroes. The truth is less poetic. Knighthood is survival, and survival is rarely solitary. You fall asleep listening to your comrades' snores and muttered dreams, realizing that without them, even this miserable life would be unbearable. Brotherhood is warm by the fire, but it doesn't pay your debts. And for a knight, debt is a constant shadow, especially when you discover just how expensive it is to lose. Armor dents, horses die, and sometimes you yourself are captured, dragged off the battlefield like a prize goose. In theory, your captors treat you with respect. In practice, they strip you of weapons, chain you in a drafty tent, and demand a ransom so outrageous your family back home faints just hearing the number. Mainstream fact, knights were often worth more alive than dead. Capturing one meant profit. Lords paid hefty sums to get their warriors back, and the process of ransoming became almost a business. Some knights even carried tokens, small badges identifying their family, so captors knew who to contact for ransom money. But while you wait in that damp tent staring at mouldy bread, you can't help but think worth more alive still feels an awful lot like miserable. It's not just capture that drains your purse. Armor repairs cost a fortune, horses must be fed like bottomless pits, and every joust you enter demands coin for gear you'll probably break. Your lord offers some support, sure, but it rarely covers the mountain of expenses. You start pawning trinkets, selling off spare saddles, even borrowing coin from squires who won't stop reminding you about it. Quirky tidbit, some knights went so deeply into debt that they turned to banditry, raiding roads or extorting peasants just to make ends meet. Historians still argue whether these rogue knights dishonoured the code of chivalry or merely revealed how unsustainable knightly life really was. You, for one, understand the temptation. When your horse throws a shoe and the farrier charges enough to bankrupt a monastery, the thought of accidentally taxing a passing merchant suddenly feels a lot less sinful. Then there's the humiliation of rans, negotiations. Imagine sitting grimy and defeated while messengers argue over your price. Too low, and your pride stings. You're apparently not worth much. Too high, and your kin go broke, resenting you for years. Either way, when you're finally released, you ride home with fewer friends, lighter pockets, and the gnawing suspicion you'll end up captured again. Your comrades joke about it, of course. Don't get taken alive, one laughs. Your ransom will bankrupt the whole village. You laugh back, but inside the anxiety eats at you, because you know he's right. Every battle carries the risk not just of injury or death, but of financial ruin. And no matter how noble the songs, no bard ever sings about the knight who came home to foreclosure notices. Historians still debate whether knighthood was truly a privilege of wealth or a trap that drained noble families dry. Sitting by the fire tonight, polishing a dented shield you can't afford to replace, you lean toward the latter. Honor is expensive, and glory doesn't pay the blacksmith. You sigh, stretching sore muscles, and glance at your comrades. They're laughing, gambling with coins that will probably vanish to debts tomorrow. You close your eyes and mutter a quick prayer, not for victory, not even for safety, but simply that you'll never hear the words, "We regret to inform you your ransom is overdue." Debt weighs heavy, but nothing sours the taste of knighthood quite like the glares of the very peasants you're sworn to protect. You ride through muddy villages, banner fluttering, expecting admiration. Instead, you see hunched backs, narrowed eyes, and hands tightening on sickles as you pass. To them, you're not a shining hero. You're the reason their grain is short, their tax is high, and their sons conscripted for labor. Mainstream fact: knights were often enforcers of their lord's authority, collecting taxes, guarding fields, or punishing rebellious villagers. While the romantic image paints knights as noble defenders of the poor, the historical reality was more complicated. Protection usually came at a price, literally. A lord demanded levies, and knights ensured they were paid. For peasants already surviving on the edge of famine, that price felt unbearable. You arrive at a farmstead to collect dues, bushels of barley, a goat, maybe a few coins. The family bows stiffly, but their eyes burn with resentment. The eldest son lingers too long, gripped tight on his pitchfork, and for a moment you wonder if he'll actually lunge. You shift in your saddle, hand brushing your sword hilt, but he finally backs away. The goat is handed over, bleating mournfully, and you ride off to the sound of silence. No thanks, no blessings, just the hollow weight of being hated. Quirky tidbit. Some peasants mocked knights behind their backs with songs and jokes, painting them as bumbling, greedy bullies. A few ballads even tell of knights being outwitted by clever villagers who hid livestock or disguised grain stores to avoid taxes. Historians still argue whether resentment was universal or varied from place to place. But from the sharp glares drilling into your armor, you'd say resentment is alive and well right here. Worse still, rebellion simmers beneath the surface. You've heard whispers of uprisings, peasants sharpening scythes, gathering in secret, vowing to throw off their burdens. And while one angry farmer isn't a threat, 100 with pitchforks can topple even armored knights. You know the stories: castles besieged, nobles dragged from halls, knights unseated not by lances but by sheer fury of the common folk. You chuckle nervously to your comrades. They'd never dare. But deep down, you're not so sure. Back at camp, you stew over it. You're sworn to uphold honor, to defend the weak, yet here you are, taking their last goat to fund your lord's banquet. The contradiction gnaws at you like a rat in the rafters. Historians still debate whether knights themselves ever felt guilty or if they justified it all as duty. You can't speak for others, but tonight, lying on your straw bed, you feel less like a guardian and more like a tax collector with sharper tools. The songs say, knights inspire awe. The truth? You inspire fear, resentment, and the quiet sharpening of blades in barns after sunset. And as you drift toward uneasy sleep, you wonder which will come first, the next campaign, or the peasants deciding they've had enough of you. The peasants' glares still linger in your mind, but time marches faster than any rebellion. Years pass, and suddenly the once proud stride of your youth feels like a slow shuffle. You wake each morning with joints that creak louder than your chainmail, knees stiff, back aching as though the armor you wore yesterday never came off. You were trained to wield sword and lance with vigor, but now even lifting your helmet feels like a small battle. Mainstream fact: many knights began training in childhood and spent decades in brutal service. By their 40s or 50s, a considerable age for the era, the wear and tear of combat often left them limping, scarred, or partially crippled. Chronic injuries were common: poorly healed fractures, arthritis, and muscle damage from years of carrying heavy armor, and there were no cozy retirements. Most knights fought until they simply couldn't anymore. You try to spar, swinging a blunted sword at a younger knight, but halfway through the drill your shoulder seizes up. The youth ducks your sluggish strike, smirks, and taps your side with ease. The watching squires snicker behind their hands. You bark at them to run laps, but inside you feel the sting. Once you were the one darting quick as a hawk. Now you're the hawk with molted feathers. Quirky tidbit: some knights wore charms or strapped relics to their bodies, believing it would restore vigor. One swore by a belt blessed to strengthen the loins, another drank concoctions of crushed antlers and honey to ease aching bones. Historians still argue whether these remedies were faith, folly, or placebo. You tried one once. A priest gave you a salve made of herbs and bear fat. It smelled terrible, stained your tunic, and the only result was being chased by dogs for 2 days. The humiliation stings more than the pain. Around the campfire, younger knights whisper about your slowing pace. Squires exchange glances, betting on how long before you're retired to managing estates instead of swinging swords. But you know the truth: not every knight has an estate to manage. For many, the only retirement plan is dying in battle or limping off to a monastery. Historians still debate whether aging knights were respected elders or quietly sidelined liabilities. Some accounts praise them as wise counselors, others describe them as burdens, mocked behind their backs. You feel both at once, hailed for your years of service in public, but privately doubting whether your sword arm is worth much anymore. One evening you sit polishing your dented armor, though you know you'll never wear it as swiftly as before. The steel gleams in the firelight, a relic of your youth. You remember the first time you donned it, when it felt like a shield of destiny. Now it feels like a coffin of iron. You sigh, flex aching fingers, and wonder if the armor will outlast you. As you crawl into your bedding, straw rustling beneath stiff joints, you admit the truth. Aging as a knight isn't a graceful decline. It's a slow betrayal of the body, each creak and ache reminding you that chivalry might be eternal, but cartilage is not. And while the songs promise eternal glory, you suspect your end will be quieter, a limp shuffle into obscurity, joints rattling like dice in a cup. The years weigh heavier than your armor now, and glory feels like a faded echo. You sit in the hall, watching younger knights polish their lances, their eyes bright with the hunger you once carried. Your own banner, once bold with colour, hangs tattered and moth-bitten in some dusty corner, barely recognised when visitors ask, "Whose is that?" You smile thinly and pretend not to care, but the sting runs deep. Mainstream fact: countless knights slipped into obscurity as they aged, their names lost to records unless they performed some great deed or were tied to powerful lords. While literature immortalized shining figures like Lancelot or Roland, the majority of real knights faded into the background, remembered only in half-broken tombstones or family whispers. The chivalric code promised immortality through honor. Reality offered a quiet, vanishing act. You try to tell stories at the fire, about the crusade sun scorching your back, about the tournament where your lance actually held steady, but the squires shuffle impatiently. They'd rather hear about the young champion's winning fame now. You catch one stifling a yawn and decide to stop mid-sentence. The silence tastes bitterer than the stale ale in your cup. Quirky tidbit: some knights, desperate to preserve their names, carved graffiti into castle walls or scratched crude drawings on shields left behind. One historian even found a knight's doodle of a joust etched into the stone of a latrine, perhaps a final attempt to say, "I was here." You think of that sometimes when you polish your shield, whether the scratches and dents you've earned will mean anything when you're gone. Your debts linger, your joints ache, and the peasants who once bowed now barely glance as you pass. They whisper about new lords, new taxes, new wars. You are yesterday's news, an old dog with a dull sword. Historians still argue whether knights sought obscurity willingly, retreating into monasteries, or whether society simply forgot them once their usefulness ended. Looking at your reflection in the warped steel of your helmet, you know it doesn't matter much which is true. Forgotten is forgotten. One evening, you sit alone in the corner of the hall as music plays and laughter echoes. No one calls your name. The torchlight flickers over the worn wood of your chair, the shadows stretching longer than your patience. You sip the last of your ale, lukewarm and sour, and let your eyes close. You think about the songs sung of knights, their victories, their romances, their glory immortalized. You wonder if any bard will ever sing of you. Likely not, but perhaps some squire, years from now, will stumble upon your shield, dented and rusted, and wonder who once carried it. Maybe that's enough. You rise slowly, joints cracking, and shuffle to your bed of straw. You whisper a promise to yourself. Even if the world forgets you, you won't forget the roads you marched, the blows you took, the nights spent under star-filled skies. And with that, you close your eyes, knowing you are already halfway to becoming a shadow in someone else's story. The firelight of youth has dwindled, and you now pass your evenings in the twilight haze of memory. You sit on a wooden bench by a narrow window, staring at the last slant of sunlight spilling across the courtyard. The banners flap faintly in the breeze, their colours dim with age, much like your own eyes. Your sword rests at your side, not sharp, not shining, just there, a silent reminder of battles fought long ago. Mainstream fact. Many aging knights retired to religious houses, becoming lay brothers, or were granted small estates in return for their service. Others simply lingered at their lord's hall, half pensioners, half advisors, never quite belonging anymore. Historians still argue whether these final years were peaceful or lonely. For you, it is both. You look back on the road that brought you here, the bruising childhood, the endless chores, the heat of crusades, the stink of camps, the jeers of peasants, the laughter of comrades. It all blends together now, less a story of glory than a long march of exhaustion. You realize honor was never a shining medal handed to you. It was a heavy cloak you carried, whether you wanted it or not. Quirky tidbit: some knights, sensing their end, had themselves buried in full armor, as if refusing to let go of the weight that defined them. Others left detailed wills, demanding their war horses be cared for like family. You wonder briefly whether you'll be remembered at all, or just fade like so many before you. Perhaps a squire will mutter your name once, perhaps not. The light fades. You sit with your memories, neither bitter nor proud, simply tired. You know now that your life was not one of fairy tale valor, but of mud, sweat, debt, and aching bones. And yet, strangely, you find comfort in it. You lived the life asked of you, carried the sword, bore the armor, endured. Whether anyone remembers doesn't matter as much as the quiet truth that you were here, that you stood, that you tried. The breeze sighs through the window, cool and gentle, and you let your eyes close.